Hi, welcome to Yo Soy. We're here downtown Fresno at CMAC. We'd love you to come down and take a tour. Hi everyone, welcome to Yo Soy. Today we're going to start a little bit of a series, and it's going to be focusing on how our healthcare system and medical providers acquire dollars and how they're divvied up, and how you, the public, should be getting involved in helping to make the decisions that deal with your family members and yourself. So to kick this off, we have a gentleman, an attorney by the name of Thorton Davidson. And Mr. Davidson, could you give us a little bit of your background
I'd be happy to.
Fresno?
First of all, thank you for interviewing me. I appreciate the opportunity to try to educate the public on some of these important matters. I am a lawyer for a little over 20 years. I was born in Texas and raised here in the Valley. My parents, my mother's passed, my father's still living. My parents were kind of integrally involved in the arts community and the food business. My mother was a food reviewer for the Fresno Bee for years. My father was a CPA, is still a practicing consultant in the accounting field. Actually has an office of lawyers. I didn't think they were a very nice set of people. I don't know that I'm very different than a lot of people in the way that they feel about lawyers. Most of them were business lawyers. My father associated with mostly business lawyers. And I was much more interested in being a plaintiff's lawyer, which is to say, representing people who complained, right? Often the disadvantaged, often the disenfranchised. Maybe it was employees, maybe it was people who were hurt. And so I did a range of things. I used to tell people I did door law, kind of whatever came through the door, sometimes with money and sometimes without.
So you attended what?
San Joaquin.
San Joaquin?
I went to San Joaquin College of Law. I graduated in 3 years from San Joaquin. Terrific institutions. Doing just a range of things. I did a little medical malpractice. I did employment law. I never represented institutions per se, so I didn't represent insurance companies.
Right.
I was always doing battle on behalf of the little guy against generally the bigger entity or the big guy.
So you gave people, you've been giving a voice to everyone here that has certain specialty cases that perhaps other people might not tackle from time to time.
I think that's probably something I kind of specialized in, which isn't something I say very willingly, because it led me into a range of cases that are pretty hard to win. And one of the things about the plaintiff's business, especially if it's contingency fee, right? I'm not being paid by my client. You want to make sure that you don't take up so many causes, so many missions, that next year you got to go to work for an insurance company because you can't make a living. Right. And so you have to pick and choose. And I will tell you that in my early career, I picked a lot of stuff with my heart instead of my head. And so I did medical malpractice, I did employment law, I did some personal injury, I did a little bit of criminal law, I probably did some family law begrudgingly. I may have dabbled in probate, which I knew nothing about. And then, with the help of another lawyer, I became involved in ERISA disability. ERISA is the federal law that controls group disability, group life insurance, group benefits throughout the United States. So if you work for a company and you have a pension and profit sharing plan, or a disability plan, or a life insurance plan, it's covered by ERISA, which is an acronym for Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And this is a federal law. There's probably only 100 to 200 lawyers in the country who practice it. It's not done in front of juries. And so we had a kind of quasi-national disability practice. And my part of that practice was to go from state to state, location to location, and mediate the cases.
Okay, so for that ERISA, is that if there's a complainant or a plaintiff, do they help fund that in some way, or is that all?
It's a good question. So in most ERISA cases involving disability, you are litigating against the largest insurance companies in the country. Hartford, Aetna, Cigna. These are people who have provided group policies to, for instance, IBM employees, or maybe CMAC employees, or if there's a group, maybe various unions, maybe certain churches. And so this is contingency fee work. Your client is coming to you having lost their job, probably, having lost their benefits, probably. They probably don't have Social Security disability yet, and they're pretty distressed and pretty unhappy. And so we didn't meet most of our clients until I flew into Chicago or New York or Atlanta or Texas.
Let me back you up one second so
Sure.
that
Take your time.
the audience will understand that when you say contingency, you're taking on the case with a signature from the client that you're going to be getting a percentage of whatever you're able to settle the case for.
Exactly.
And
or litigated, and if we win, then I get a percentage of that. But the key is, if you don't win, you don't get paid.
no, $0.
Right. You're in effect partnering with the client in using your legal skills to advocate on behalf of the client's disability, injury, loss, etc.
So that says a lot for you, because you wouldn't be sitting here still an attorney if you hadn't been successful on many of those cases.
Well, in all honesty, Edna, in order to be a good plaintiff's attorney, you often have to do other things. So I represent some businesses, not insurance companies, but I represent some businesses, and you do some work that is paid work to subsidize or underwrite the cases that you're passionate about. So I did that 7, 8 years. I'm happy to say that we resolved probably 90+% of the cases, and even though people are getting half a loaf, sometimes less than half a loaf, at least they get something. We would get paid for our work, and we would be able to move on and help other people. We got disability benefits for hundreds of people.
That's wonderful.
Across the country.
That's very helpful.
It was very gratifying work. Very gratifying
So
work.
from there you kind of gravitated to, you left that.
I sold out of that practice, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And then you came back to center on the community, more or less?
I guess it was a searching process, where I wanted to land. I'd now practiced about 20 years. I couldn't retire. I didn't want to retire. And I wanted to do something that I was used to litigating against very large insurance companies. I'd liked litigating and negotiating on behalf of the little guy or little gal. And one of the areas that struck me as really having a need here in Fresno County was medical malpractice.
Why? What struck you about that area specifically?
Like ERISA law, if you mention it among other plaintiffs' lawyers, medical malpractice, most of them flee the room because they want nothing to do with it. So I liked the challenge. There is a very large, as well there should be, medical malpractice defense industry, which defends doctors and nurses and hospitals. They're very well funded, they're very knowledgeable, and they're very tough advocates. The lawyers are very tough advocates. You don't sue a hospital or nurses or doctors and they roll over for you and cash spills out on the sidewalk.
No
Doesn't
way.
happen. Frankly, it shouldn't happen. I mean, one of the things I always used to say about ERISA that I say about medical malpractice is we're kind of working the same side of the fence, even though my client's interests are X and your client's interests are not X. The whole goal of litigation and negotiation is to come closer to a just result. Maybe the just result takes some money out of your pocket. Maybe my client loses. But it's what trial lawyers say about a jury. We may not understand how they get there, but they got there. Mm-hmm. And they have their own logic as to how they got there. Something that most people don't appreciate.
Right. And really, at the same time, when you're somewhat coming to some type of agreement, so to speak, you're also helping to resolve some of the applications of the law. And that helps other people down the line. Maybe not at that moment, and not your client per se, other than getting them some type of compensation to correct the wrong to some degree. But then you're discovering the application of law and how it should be applied versus how it was.
That's a great point. You know, I was talking to a medical expert, one of our medical experts, because you can't really undertake a case unless you have an expert in that field, neurology, maybe it's organ donation like this, who will tell you, yes, there was a breach of the standard of care, and yes, the damages that your client is claiming are related to that breach. And I'm talking to this expert, and I've used him on several cases, and he is I'm not going to name him, but he is a Southern California-based cardiologist. Mm-hmm. And he basically said to me on the phone, there is some wacky stuff going on up there. He said, you think of California as kind of, all one, Los Angeles and San Francisco, but I'm having a feeling that maybe the Central Valley is someplace else. And I said, with our impoverished community here, mm-hmm. There are often levels of care that do not reflect the quality of care that maybe occurs at a Stanford or a UCSF or a Los Angeles, Pasadena, Sutter up in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. It's not to say we don't have excellent hospitals, Valley Children's, Community, St. Agnes, Clovis Community. We have wonderful institutions, mm-hmm. and they save lives every day.
Let me chime in here.
Sure.
Also, I need to say that in my last couple of months, I've had some experiences as well with the medical profession and the RNs, the doctors. They're very nice people. They're gracious, but I'm agreeing with what the observation is. It's the application. We have the rules and regulations. We have HIPAA. We have the money coming in. It's the policy and procedure and how they're executed within those structures that
Sure.
really I see as an issue. Is that kind of where?
This expert, and he was talking about how I was bringing to his attention some very unusual sets of circumstances. He said to me a thing that it wasn't an attaboy for me, but it reminded me as to why I do this. I said, that's why these cases are very hard up here. And he said, but the more that you litigate them and you bring them to light, the better it's going to be.
Right.
And from my standpoint, you can't get better than that.
Right.
That's why you get up in the morning. Besides the fact you got to make a living, and that's true whether you want to get up in the morning or not. If you can, and I think this organ donation case is a great example. If you can require people to follow the law and educate other people as to what the law is, maybe it drops your caseload, but a lot more people get treated properly. And that's called making a living and doing a social good at the same time.
Correct.
And
it's helping the majority of the folks.
Goal.
And not just one or two people. And it's not just about money. It's about, how do I want to say, the ethics of it all. And application of the law. And also it's a learning as a process for all of us, really.
Sure.
I mean, this helps the general public know what they have an opportunity to speak up about at the front end versus when they're in the middle of a situation and realizing I don't have a say, and I'm trying to help my loved one, you know, whether it be a mom, dad, husband, foster child, whomever, that they are stuck with whatever that person, that professional is expressing to them. They don't have opportunity to rebuttal because they really don't know the ins and outs.
Well,
So-
you're talking about something we talk about proactive medicine. Kind of, that's a Kaiser model, you know, a little bit, right? I'm gonna solve the issue before it, right? That's the whole concept behind Thrive, right? If I keep people healthy, they don't have to see the doctor as much. What I talk to people about is you have to be a proactive patient. That's the single most important thing. And how do you become a proactive patient? Well, you use the internet, you talk with other people, you network. There's no reason, and you watch Anna Collins, right? You get educated,
Right.
so that when you're in these situations, even though you may not understand all the components of how do we address this elder care problem, how do we address a mental health problem when we really don't have mental health facilities, how do we treat our elderly parents in a dignified way in a system that's not really necessarily set up to treat them in always a dignified way. How do we do that? Well, we gain knowledge. And knowledge isn't something you get at the university or private school or Columbia University or Oxford. It's knowledge that you get that you can understand, and so that you can turn to the doctor or the nurse or the hospital administrator and say, why? Why does that have to be? And could it be done a different way? Even if you don't know what it is, even if you're not certain as to which direction it goes. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right.
I think.
It's a voice. Now you have a certain case that you're bringing to light today. You can give us, because I don't want to hamper the outcome of the
Sure.
case. I'll allow you to express to the audience what it is that they need to be aware of. You may want to give an overview of what the case is, perhaps, and how you became involved with this particular situation, and then perhaps talk a little bit about what the audience might need to be on the lookout for, and then give your information, because if they have any questions, or perhaps they've encountered a situation that is at issue in their mind, they have an opportunity to talk to someone like yourself to pursue something. Or
Hopefully. So on a referral from someone I knew through my early education, Mike O'Connor, who is the plaintiff in this matter, came to me with a terrible story. His daughter, who was young, but an adult, had tried to kill herself. And she had been rushed to the hospital. They didn't, by a boyfriend. They hadn't contacted the parents yet. And community hospital jumped in, and from what I can tell from all the records, and I'm not a doctor, they tried to save this young woman's life. But her name was Brittany, and her last name was O'Connor. And she was pretty far gone by the time she came into the hospital. And when I mean far gone, I'm saying her heart was still beating, her organs were still functioning, but her brain activity was pretty significantly compromised. Mike was married to Shauna O'Connor. They're divorced now. Shauna's not part of this lawsuit, but she's kind of integral to the story. And Mike thought his daughter was still alive. He believed, because of her responses to certain stimuli, that she wasn't beyond all hope. And so he met with the doctors, along with his father, who is essentially Terrence Mike O'Connor Sr., but they call him Terry, and Mike is my client. And the doctors prescribed a particular approach that Mike was in support of, which was, we're going to take a wait and see. We're going to see if she improves.
What was the time span for that wait and see?
She entered the hospital around November 17th of 2017. Mike understood that they were going to look at it over a several week, 30-day period of time. There are a number of problems with that. And what comes up in this case is the issue of organ donation. Now, organ donation is a significant social good. Mm-hmm. In fact, it is more than just a social good. It is a way of enhancing the life of people who still have life by the use of organs, tissue, from bodies that can no longer use those organs or tissue.
Right.
And there's, as you may know, there's waiting list after waiting list after waiting list of people for hearts and livers and kidneys and tissues and corneas, and it goes on and on and on.
Right.
And one of the key ways that you can donate, I don't know about what your driver's license says, but mine says, no, yours doesn't?
No.
Mine says, now, truthfully, by the way, when they see it's a lawyer, they don't take any of the organs because they know that they're shriveled and no one would want to take them. I'm pretty certain.
Not combative?
No. Maybe you could replant it in Genghis Khan or Khan or something. Anyway, so that's one way of reflecting the person's decision to donate organs. Mm-hmm. You can do it by having a written directive. This is what I wish to do. So Mike is hoping his daughter's alive, and she's failing.
And when you say failing, medically, she's failing. The brain waves are starting to diminish. The breathing is starting to diminish.
Well, you're making a very good point, because what happens is once your brain stops functioning, then the rest of the organs are going to follow. And so the opportunity to do organ donation diminishes as that brain capacity
drops. One of the things that I think the audience needs to understand is that as a person starts to lose life, internally, the organs will start to fight against the body itself in some ways.
Absolutely.
It starts to shut down. So everybody needs to be clear and understanding that you only have a specific window of time to harvest organs to get a good organ and save that in a working fashion that would be transferable to another individual.
So in the organ community, I keep using the word harvesting because I'm an advocate and I love the flavor of that. In the organ donation community, they don't talk about harvesting. They talk about gifting. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful concept to gift. It's, in this case, very often it's the gift of life or sight or a still beating heart. So Mike's thinking that his daughter's got a chance, and the medical professionals around him realize that that is very, very, very unlikely. And his wife realizes that's very unlikely. And so the hospital follows a procedure in which they have an ethics department, and the ethics department helps to identify the person who is the ethically appropriate, capital E, capital A, appropriate person to terminate physiologic care, which is to say, pull the plug.
Exactly.
And so let's assume that you have this whole massive family, and brothers doesn't get along with sister, and sister doesn't get along with uncle, and uncle doesn't get along with father. And we don't have Brittany didn't have a husband. Her children weren't adults. So who does this fall to? It falls to the parents, right?
Right.
And how do you make the decision? How does a hospital make the decision as to whether to end life? So it has a mandated procedure, and in this case, well, one might have issues as to why they chose Mrs. O'Connor versus Mr. O'Connor. The fact is that Mrs. O'Connor was prepared to make the right decision, which was to allow Brittany to go. Very hard for Mike to accept that.
Any parent, any.
Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
What an impossible choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the reverse of the natural order. You're saying goodbye to your child. So, though Mike made an interesting point to me that I thought was terrific, as you hear the rest of the story, you're going to realize he got cut out. And he said to me, you know, if they had treated me with dignity and cut me in, I probably would have gotten sooner to the place of understanding and acknowledging that Brittany had to leave. Mm-hmm. Had they treated me and my perspective with some dignity, I probably would have treated their perspective as more correct than I could when I was being shunted to the side.
In other words, consideration and compassion on both
Sure.
sides of the fence.
Sure. None of this is what the lawsuit is about, unfortunately. So they make the decision to authorize the mom as the ethically appropriate person. And I'm not sure how clearly Mike understood that or was advised about it. He was pretty upset. And he arrives on the day after Thanksgiving. It's the 24th of November. Thursday that year was the 23rd. I think I may have my dates right.
Mm-hmm. And this was 2017?
This is 2017,
okay.
Exactly. And according to Mike, they said to him, you have 3 minutes to leave. So you have 3 minutes to say goodbye to your daughter.
Okay. Now, is it okay to reference what was seen on the Fresno Bee? There was a video that was...
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a video, pretty remarkable piece of evidence. Kind of heart-stopping, heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. So they say to Mike, you got to leave. And say goodbye to her, and we're going to terminate life support. And Mike says, no, you're not. First of all, I want a second opinion. They say, we got a second opinion. They had. And the second opinion was consistent with the first opinion, which was that Brittany's chance of recovering from brain death or near brain death was not even statistically possible. It wasn't even 1%. From everything that I've seen and the experts I've talked to, they were right.
Okay.
They were right.
In other words, she would be, if you continue to pump in air into the body and so forth, she would be in a vegetative state.
And the organs would start to fail.
Okay.
So at this point, this is where the law kicks in. And there's a law that's been adopted in California called the Anatomical Gift Act. I don't know why these things that always deal with really important parts of our lives always have to sound like, you know, they're the McCain Feingold finance, you know, why they have to be so dry. But it's the Anatomical Gift Act, and it is essentially the act that controls how organ donations are made. So
to explain it to the audience a little bit better, when you say how the organs are donated, you're talking about how the succession of decision making is, correct?
Well, even broader than that.
Okay.
So there are 4 organizations. The U.S. is carved up, if you will, bad metaphor, but is divided into organ procurement organizations, what are called OPOs, and there's several in different states. In smaller states, there might be one or two. In larger states like California, there are four. And so you've got one down in San Diego, and you've got one in Los Angeles, and you've got one that runs from Fresno County all the way up to Northern California, and then you have one that runs down the mountain communities. So you've got four.
Before we go on.
Go ahead.
Do we still have the central messaging area, central area of UNOS where they disperse, they bring in all the information for the donations and then decide?
That's a very good question. I don't know that. I know that there are lists, national lists. And obviously those lists have to be filtered, if you will, by how far. So if your community hospital, there is one organ donation provider, procurer, that handles all the referrals and the organ donations within community hospital. And that is called Donor Network West.
And that's for Fresno County, all of Fresno County?
All of Fresno County.
That's interesting.
All of Madera, all the way north, all the way up into Santa Clara, San Jose, San Francisco,
Okay.
all the way over to Sacramento.
Okay.
It's probably the largest donor network within California. The donor network that works out of community, which is called Donor Network West, actually has an office in community hospital. And I understand that they have very early access to information about people who are likely organ donors. Maybe they've checked the box on their driver's license. Maybe they've got an advance directive, or maybe, as in the case of Brittany, there's a family member who's willing to approve of an organ donation. Unfortunately, if it was as simple as that, I wouldn't be here and there wouldn't be lawyers, right? Because everybody would figure it out and the law would be applied appropriately and you wouldn't have anybody to interview.
There you go.
So they designate Sean O'Connor as the ethically appropriate person to pull the plug. From what I can see, one might have a disagreement with that, but Shauna O'Connor was prepared to make the right decision. She was absolutely prepared to make the right decision and should be credited for doing that. And Mike was just holding out hope. But then things went off the rails. At that point, Donor Network West and the hospital recognized that Brittany was a very, very good candidate. She was young. They didn't find anything in her system that would make her less than a good candidate. She had a still beating heart. She had good liver, good kidneys. There were tissue that could be donated. And there was a decision to approach the family and ask about donating these organs. So this is where the Anatomical Gift Act kicks in.
Okay.
And the Anatomical Gift Act essentially says, okay, if you're a wife and your husband is there, the husband gets to make the decision. Easy. If you don't have any adult children and you don't have a spouse, it then may fall to your parents. That was the case here. Brittany didn't have a husband, and as I said, didn't have adult children. And so what the Anatomical Gift Act says, like a lot of the things in the law, it's not very clear, but it's clear enough. It says any person in the class can donate the organs. That means mom or dad, except there's a caveat. as there always is in the law, right?
Of course.
Of course. And the caveat said, but if the organ procurement organization becomes aware of an objection of somebody else in the class, then it has to be 50% of the class that makes the decision. So let's change the facts. Let's say Brittany is divorced and has 3 adult children, and one of them objects, but the other 2 say, we're all in for organ donation. Majority, 2 out of 3.
Right.
And the objecting party is effectively voted out. But when you have only 2 members of the class, mom and dad, the only way you get to a majority is both. And that's where, as I say, things went off the rail here. Donor Network West and the hospital went to mom and said, you've made the decision to terminate physiologic care. That was the right decision. And now, as you know, we're having problems with Mike out there. Mike is holding out hope for something that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And we're going to make you the decider. And you can donate these organs. She didn't know. Nobody sat down with Shauna. The best evidence I can find is nobody sat down with Shauna and said, by the way, you're in a class of people that where he's objecting, you both have to agree. Nobody explains that to her. Oh. Nobody explains that to Mr. O'Connor.
Well, wouldn't that be back onto the professionals within community hospital? Someone at that point that is knowledgeable in those areas should have bridged that gap at some point.
Edna, it is impossible to believe that those people are not thoroughly trained in the requirements of the Anatomical Gift Act. Donor Network West has to know it like you and I know the names of our children and their birth dates. Like how many toes we have on our right foot. Mm-hmm. They have to know it cold. And that's the call of this case. It's not just Mike's rights being abridged. This is the part of the case that has to reverberate beyond the 4 corners of what happens here. Because in 1,200 pages of Brittany O'Connor's medical records, there is not a single reference to the Anatomical Gift Act or the Health and Safety Code that adopts its terms. There is no evidence that anybody said, hey, Mr. O'Connor, hey, Mrs. O'Connor, here's how it works. They didn't know. They didn't have the slightest idea. So Mike is told, you got 3 minutes to leave. He says, I'm not leaving. He said, I want a second opinion. They said, we've already got one. He said, I'm not leaving anyway. So they bring in the security guard. Security guard's very nice. He says, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving my daughter. Heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. But that's any parent's response.
Any parent. Mm-hmm. They then bring in a Fresno police officer. Compassionate. Goes and sits down with Mike. And the first question he asks, is this your daughter? Just like he should. Who is this? Right? She's not a body to harvest organs. She's a person.
Right.
She doesn't have brain waves anymore, but she's a person. And a conversation ensues between them. And Mike tries to explain why he thinks that she still might recover, and he's holding out hope, and the police officer has a body cam on.
Right.
And it's all being filmed. And about 10 minutes into that conversation, and it is a conversation, mm-hmm. Mike says, I know why they're doing this. And the police officer says, why are they doing this? He said, they want to turn off life support so they can harvest her organs. I know it. I know that's what they're doing. And I'm not giving my permission. Now, he didn't know what the law is, but he's got a sense that his vote counts. At that point, remarkably, his father wanders into the camera, and his father says, in communities, people are standing at the door. while Shauna's in the other room signing the paperwork.
Is this all occurring in the room where the patient is?
The Donor Network West people, from what we understand, are in a separate room. The video is a video at the bedside of Brittany. She's there. Mike is sitting next to her. The police officer is standing or sitting such that you can see Brittany out of the corner of the picture and you can see Mike. And then the hospital people and maybe Donor Network West people are in the room or just at the edge of the room listening. And Mr. O'Connor Sr. wanders in and says, you know, I'm not entirely certain what the law is, but I'll bet both of them have to agree.
Oh. And that you can hear on the recording, the body cam.
Now, if I later learned, as Mike O'Connor learned, that not only was that true, but the people who were standing at the doorway, they knew it was true.
So they had a duty to speak up and say something.
Absolutely. And they didn't say a word. In fact, it gets worse, unfortunately. I guess fortunately for me, because I'm a litigator and we traffic in misery and mayhem, right? In the medical records it says, under normal circumstances, out of human kindness and compassion, we would tell Mr. O'Connor about the organ donation. Well, how about the statute? But I digress. We would tell him about it. But given that he's been threatening and very disruptive, we're not going to tell him until after the organ donation is done.
That has nothing to do.
Right, it's what I call the blank HOLE exception. There's no, the law doesn't say if you're really a disruptive, difficult guy, you get less benefit under the law. That might work when you're being arrested. Maybe then they say you're resisting arrest. But this is his legal right. And in essence, what these people are writing in the medical records is, we're going to violate the law and use an excuse to do it.
Mm-hmm. Which is a non-excuse.
It's a non-excuse.
Right.
They also write in the medical records right after that. And it's one of the most remarkable statements I've seen in thousands and tens of thousands of pages of medical record. It says, nothing that we've done here prohibits Mr. O'Connor from going to court. Well, at that point in that sentence, you would think going to court to stop the organ procurement, except you haven't told him about it, but he kind of has a sense that it's happening, of going to court, comma, because whether or not the organs are donated or not, we intend to terminate physiologic care. Well, that's a complete non sequitur. And by the way, it's late on a Friday afternoon on Thanksgiving weekend. What court is Mr. O'Connor going to go to?
That's right. You'd have to wait till.
By the way, they harvest the organs the next day. So it's what we call like consciousness of guilt. I'm telling you, I know I'm depriving you of your right to go stop this. But you know what?
Doesn't matter.
Bad.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. And they harvest the organs the next day. They send them to Stanford, the three major organs, the heart, the liver, and the kidneys. And they send the tissue for research to UCSF. I think the lung tissue.
Well, let me ask a question here. From that date, it was Friday afternoon, late?
Yeah.
Okay. From that date, we know the court's open on Monday. Would her organs still be valuable to the gifting process by Monday?
Probably not.
Not? Okay.
Probably
because the
not.
body was then starting to attack itself, or on the verge within hours
They'd
of
already
that.
harvested the organs on Saturday anyway. You can't put them back. Can't unring the bell.
Oh, they had already started
It's already done.
the process.
So
Oh,
the idea of
okay.
saying, oh, Mike could go, Mr. O'Connor could go to the court was just, it was a feint. It was a, FEIN, it it's a bogus right that you're giving him that he can't exercise, and you haven't told him that you're doing the organ donations tomorrow. When he gets to the end with the police officer, he willingly leaves, and he says, "Now I want you to tell him that I think she's still alive," and that's when he leaves. What's really surprising is that when security makes the 911 call that brings in the officer, they say, Mrs. O'Connor has the power of attorney.
Non-existent.
Not true. And Mike is known to carry a knife.
Non-existent.
Please, if you met my client, you would say he is least, you and I are more likely to carry a machete than Mike is to carry a kitchen knife. I mean, was he upset? Hospitals deal with upset people all the time.
That's right.
So we've launched this, Ty Karazi and I of the Yara Law Group have launched this litigation to see if we can obtain some recovery for Mike. Mike's objection here was, okay, my daughter was dead. Mm-hmm. She was brain dead. And they were going to they were going to pull the plug. I have the right to object to this organ donation and inter or cremate the entirety of my daughter's body, including the heart that beat in her chest. And nobody has the right to make that decision for me. And if my objection was accorded the weight that it should have been accorded under the law, then her organs shouldn't have been harvested.
So essentially what I'm hearing is that you're just putting or I should say, making community hospital and the people that are doing the organ gathering aware that they're in breach. They need to reveal all 100% of the information.
That's not going to happen. By the way, I can't make many promises. You make predictions as a litigator. You fail, right? That OJ is going to get convicted.
Right.
I'm dead on certain. Well,
right.
Or this case is an absolute dead bang loser, and then you win, right? Mm-hmm. Or somebody else wins. It is unconscionable. It is despicable that there's not a piece of paper that you can hand to a parent or the siblings or the adult children and say, here are your rights. Without an advance directive, without a box checked on the driver's license, here are your rights under the law. How do you wish to proceed? Because you and I both know, if you told people what their rights were, often people would choose organ donation.
Correct.
Life comes out of death. How do you get better than that? You can't get better than that.
No.
But what's despicable about this is not only they're not advising people, but they're hiding behind the social good to take a right from somebody. I went to one of my elderly relatives, I won't identify which one, and I pitched the defense side. I said, this is a social good, and it's very important, and people could live and thrive and go on with their life. And so one guy didn't get his, and my elderly relative said,
uh-oh.
Okay, it's a social good. I said, yes. And it's very important to people, yes. Not over my rights. If you don't make me part of the process, then you don't get to wave the flag of social good because you've denigrated that flag and your right to wave it because you haven't respected my rights. Rights that are built right into the statute that say, thou shalt, thou may, and thou cannot. Right there.
And that brings us to this litigation.
So one of the things I'm hoping, Edna, besides to come again and talk about, we want to talk about our aging population. We're going to talk about the rights that people have to become involved in how medical dollars are spent.
Right. Yes, that's true. I looked up a little bit, did a little research, and I found that...
Good interviewers do that.
Yes. We do pass bills, and we do vote on them, so we know XYZ number of dollars are coming to our county, community, area, however you want to explain that part of it. They're dispersed from the Attorney General. They come to the Board of Supervisors, and at the Board of Supervisors juncture, there are some people that are professionals in the areas, and they help to create policy and procedure as to how those dollars will be divvied up to each of the agencies that we have here in Fresno County, which is wonderful. But we have not, the audience, myself, have not exercised our right to attend those meetings at the Board of Supervisors to advise people as to how they would like to see those policies and procedures directed.
The dollars spent, right?
Well, not only the dollars,
right,
but what we have at issue right here. You know, who in our family units are going to be caring for our loved ones, whether they're able or not able, and then who exactly will be able to, you know, take, like you said, in the lineup, take that opportunity to make a decision. Extend it 5 minutes. So that's, I
all
want
good
to bring,
stuff to talk about.
Yes.
That we need to talk about at
Right.
a later time. My goal here is, you know, obviously my goal is to recover compensation for my client. Money seems like a really bad substitute for what he lost, but, and here's one of the unfortunate parts of my realities of my practice, is this. The only way you can really punish an institution is monetarily. And they can't do this, what they did here.
No.
They cannot do this. They have to advise people what their rights are. And if that leads to less organ donations, so be it. I suspect if they advise people what their rights are, it probably will lead to as many or more organ donations because people will feel included.
That's right.
It's shocking to me that the father walks in and essentially spouts the law, and he's not even the one who should be doing it. It should be the organ procurement organization, Donor Network West, and it should be community. So what I'm hoping, what you do with these cases is you throw a little tiny pebble in the water, and you hope that the circle grows.
Right.
Right? And so that the next time somebody walks in to community hospital and that brother says, I don't think this is a good idea, and his two sisters say, it's all right. We're going to make the decision. We're going to donate the organs, and it's all going to be good. And he's been heard, but it's gone in another direction. Because
Right.
you can't have this happen. You can't have your daughter die twice.
No. No.
It's not fair.
Well, it's just not right.
It's just not.
It's in the law. It's written. And that's why we create
Right.
those laws.
Right.
And we have gentlemen like yourself, and we have a court.
Right.
And the judge and the jury, so
Right.
that we can stay in the area that's, how do I want to say? It's a gray area, but as we go along, we zero in on exactly how the application of the law should be.
Absolutely.
That's the goal for everyone.
Thank you.
And so I love that you came in and were able to give us some information on this. Of course, this, to me, is a benefit to all of our people in the community because they will be more informed. And hopefully this will push the monetary, having to pull it out of their budget is going to make the light bulb go on and say, hey, we need to follow through with the procedure as it's written.
Sure.
And the application should be across the board for everyone
Sure.
that comes in the door, and not just for the dying situation, but also and the organ donation, but for
everybody.
every facet.
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, could you share with the audience your office information or website?
I have a website. Ty Karazi has a website too. Mine is thorntondavidsonlaw.com. My local telephone number is 559-476-5064. Mr. Karazi, who has an office downtown here on Fresno Street and Fulton, is 559-441-1